Well, good morning, and in my case, good afternoon. It's 2 p.m. In Amsterdam. And welcome to this webinar. Thanks for the invite. As Fernanda already said, I'm 𝗬𝗵𝗲 an assistant professor in educational sciences at the Vrije Universiteit here in Amsterdam. And in this webinar, I will talk for about 30 minutes on our research on dialogic classroom talk. And I will mainly focus on our research in early childhood classrooms. And in these 30 minutes, I would like to do three things. First of all, I will say something about what we mean with dialogic classroom talk. So I will basically say, describe some characteristics of dialogic classroom talk and say something about our conceptualization of this construct. Secondly, I will show how dialogic classroom talk looks like in practice, and specifically how it looks like in early childhood education. And third of all, I would like to share some of the results of our studies on the effectiveness of dialogic classroom talk on student learning. But let me first introduce myself, then say something about my ideas on good education, and end this introduction with a photo collage of all the wonderful people I have been collaborating with and working with over the past year. And throughout this webinar, I think you will hear their voices in my presentation. Well, this is me in a Dutch pre-K classroom, playing the role of a patient. And as a kid, I was always fascinated by the role of language in social interaction. For example, I really enjoyed playing different roles and using language associated with a role, in this case, the role of doctor and patient. And somehow this fascination for language has never let me go and has become the object of my research. And as a kid, I always liked these awkward conversations during birthday parties. I just liked to observe them and like to understand what was going on in this social interaction. So this is me, and this is what led me to do research on the role of language in social interaction. Well, then a few words on my ideas on good education. And those words and those ideas on good education will hopefully help you to understand why I study and how I conceive of dialogic classroom talk. So let's have a look at three weighing skills. And these three weighing skills represent three types of visions on education, on a good education. And these visions are somewhat extreme. You won't see these visions in practice, but they are helpful models to understand what is going on in practice and what kind of vision is underlying educational practice. So at the end of the scale, we put cultural meaning and intentions of teachers. And on the other end of the scale, we put children's sense, motives, and interests. And when we look at the first scale, we see a disbalance. So in this scale, children's personal sense and their interests and their motives puts the most weight in the scale. In this type of education, what we see is that what a child wants, what he finds personally interesting, and what he needs is most important. And a teacher is more or less a facilitator of this process. So a teacher is responsible for a rich learning environment in which children can decide what he or she wants to do and at what time. We call this model a reformed pedagogic model of education. The second model, cultural meaning and the intentions of the teacher, puts the most weight in the scale. So it's a teacher who decides what the children have to learn, when they have to learn, and how they have to learn. And what the children finds interesting, their motives, is less important. This model is often referred to as a transmission model. So it's a teacher who transmits knowledge on the children, and the children are received as some kind of sponge that can receive knowledge and that has to reproduce knowledge. And then, not surprisingly, the third model, we call this a transformation model. And here we see a balance between what a child wants, so the child's personal sense making, their motives, their interests, and what a teacher wants, his intentions or his meanings and his cultural meanings that he wants to give to the children. So in this model, and we also use the model in developmental education, and this is an approach to education that is based on Vygotsky's work. And I also think that classroom conversation should be orchestrated according to this model. So it should be a balance between giving children space to voice their ideas, to reason, to think together, and connecting these ideas to the larger culture and cultural history. So this is something I want to share with you about what I think is good education. So good education should be balancing between children's personal sense and teachers' intentions and cultural meaning. And this helps you to understand my and our work on dialogic classroom talk. And then I will end this short introduction with the voices that you will hear throughout this conversation, throughout this presentation. And on the top line, you see all these wonderful professors that have supervised me over the years. Bert van Oers, Professor Sarah Michaels, Cathy O'Connor, Cordy Kesden, Wim Wardecker, and Neil Mercer. And on the bottom line, you see all my PhD students and postdocs and colleagues that I closely work with in several projects on dialogic classroom talk and play-based learning. And I will credit them with this photo collage because the ideas that I will present in this webinar could not have been here without them. So it's all about team science in my case. So this brings me to the first topic of my conversation. What is dialogic classroom talk? And what are some of the characteristics of dialogic classroom talk? And how does it differ from what we call in literature monologic classroom talk? Well, there's much to say about this topic, but I will keep it rather brief. Well, what we know from decades of research on classroom talk, and see, for example, the book by Lauren Resnick, Cherise Clark, and Krista Estran, or the reviews done by Christine Howie and Abedin, and the reviews done by Neil Mercer and Lynn Dawes, is that most of the interaction in classroom is monologic. This means that classroom talk is overly teacher-steered, and that, in the words of 𝗵𝗻 𝗏𝗏, students are always positioned as answer getters. So it's a teacher who poses a closed question, and the children have to get the answers the teacher has in his head or her head. What we see also internationally is the dominance of an interaction response evaluation sequence. And this is a well-studied interaction sequence in the literature. And this sequence always starts with an initiation by the teacher. And often this is a closed question. And this initiation is then followed by a short response of one or more students, after which this response is evaluated in terms of right or wrong. So this is what we see in many classrooms internationally. Well, what the problem here is that monologic talk is a perfect way of getting to know your students and getting to know what they already know. So getting to know the pre-knowledge, or as a test-based interaction sequence. But it does not give any space for students to voice their ideas, to reason and think together. And already in the 80s, Professor Cordy Kesden from Harvard Graduate School of Education wrote that we should move away from this so-called IRE pattern, and that we should move away from reciting knowledge. But how? Well, by supporting teachers to build dialogic classroom cultures in their classrooms. And in 2015, I wrote a paper together with Sarah Michaels in Mind, Culture and Activity, in which we tried to formulate some of the characteristics of dialogic classroom talk. And I will get briefly to these characteristics. But first of all, we can now distinguish between monologic and dialogic classroom talk. It's a continuum from monologic to dialogic. And a classroom conversation, you can put them on some point of this continuum. And what we see is that most of the classroom conversations are more towards monologic classroom talk, and that we aim in our research to move those conversations more to dialogic classroom talk. So the first characteristic that we described of dialogic classroom talk is there should be a shared topic of interest. And this topic gives direction and purpose to the conversation. It determines this is what we as a group of participants of this conversation are talking about. So this sounds logical, but surprisingly, in many classroom conversations, there's no such thing as a shared topic of interest, or the topic remains very implicit. So not all the participants know what the shared topic of interest is. So for a dialogic classroom conversation, it's important to choose a topic that children can talk about. And can talk about means that they have some pre-knowledge, some language to say something about this topic. They want to talk about it, so they are motivated, interested in it. See the previous model of good education that I presented earlier. And a topic that is culturally meaningful. And in this respect, the role of the teacher is very important. She or he aims to connect his or her meanings, her intentions, with the motives, interests, and pre-knowledge of the children. Second, in dialogic classroom talk, the teacher, and here I refer to the work of Rupert Wiedgerith, creates creative spaces of reflection. And in these spaces, children reflect on the ideas that are voiced in relation to the shared topic of interest. At the same time, they also reflect on their own ideas in response to the ideas of the other children. So in these spaces of reflection, these creative spaces of reflection, differences between the ideas of children might become visible, but there are also many opportunities to connect ideas of different children. Or to speak with the philosopher Gadamer, children do not have to agree with one another. The idea is that dialogic classroom conversation supports mutual understanding of one another. And I think that in the end, dialogic classroom talk can support democratic citizenship, I think, because we aim for shared understanding and we aim, differences might be there, but the aim of dialogic classroom talk is that we voice these differences and try to understand one another. And in this respect, teachers play an important role to create these spaces of reflection. And in our work, we developed several dialogic talk tools that support teachers in doing so. For example, one of these talk tools is supporting children to think together. And you can do that by asking, do you agree or disagree with what Jamal just said and why? And then the third characteristic of dialogic classroom talk is that it always contains elements of a polylogue with more knowledgeable cultural, historical others that are not physically present in the classroom. In a polylogue, the ideas of the children are placed in a broader cultural perspective. Are the ideas that we just discussed in our conversation correct? And what else do we need to know? And what does an expert outside of our classroom thinks about this topic? And in the educational context, teachers can support a polylogue by means of bringing information books into the class, into the conversation, by materials, by experts visiting the classroom, etc. And in a polylogue, and it's a very important part of a dialogue, I think, children's ideas are connected with the wider world. For example, I once visited a pre-K classroom that worked for several weeks on the theme traveling to Mars. They had a classroom conversation on the solar system, and what they tried was building a model of the solar system on the floor of their classroom. And at some point, the children were not sure about the relative distance between the Earth and Mars. So they put planets on the floor of the classroom, and they were not sure on the relative distance between the planets. So at some point, one of the kids remembered that he saw a model in one of the information books that they had in the classroom. So he moved to the information table, grabbed the book, and together with the other children, they compared the model in the book, that was a model of an expert, with their own model. And they were talking about it and changing the model. So this is an example in which the ideas of experts that were represented in the book became a new voice in the group's conversation. So this is what we mean by polylogue, and it's a very important aspect of dialogue, I think. Okay, I've now given a brief overview of our conceptualization of dialogic classroom talk. So I think we should move on to the next part of my talk. What does it look like in practice? Or in other words, how can teachers orchestrate dialogic classroom conversations? Well, to support teachers in orchestrating dialogic classroom talk, together with 4 teachers, a teacher trainer, and my former supervisor, Sarah Michaels from Clark University, and Bert van Oers, we developed the model to talk intervention. And an important part of this intervention is a set of dialogic talk tools, and I referred to that earlier on. And these dialogic talk tools are just simple tools, conversational tools that teachers can use to, first of all, encourage children to share, expand, clarify their ideas. For example, by using peer-to-peer talk, by asking open questions, by being silent after asking a question, and that is very, very difficult for teachers, we experience, and we also saw that on our video observations. And being silent is a very important tool for children to structure their ideas. Another part of this first group of tools is asking children, can you say more about it? Well, the first set of tools is encouraging children to listen to one another. For example, by saying, can you repeat what Nadine just said? And this seems very easy, but it's a very powerful tool. Because what is needed to develop ideas in a classroom conversation, to think together, you need to understand and listen closely to what a previous child just said, to build on each other's ideas. And the third group of talk tools is supporting children to reason. So you can, for example, say, why do you think that? And does it always go this way? The fourth group of talk tools is encouraging kids to think together. For example, by saying, can you add on the ideas that James just voiced? Or for example, by saying, do you agree or disagree with him and why? And the fifth group of talk tools that we defined is encouraging children to reflect on the course of the conversation. For example, by asking, how did you think the conversation went? And in the conversation, you can ask, do you understand what he just said? And why don't you understand him? Just to make communication more explicit. Well, I've shared the different talk tools on the screen again, and you can study them later on. And I think together, these talk tools, together with some conversational ground rules, for example, the work by Neil Mercer and his colleagues, these are really simple tools that can really support teachers to make the classroom conversation more dialogic. When a teacher starts learning to use these talk tools and build a dialogic classroom culture, this looks a little bit something like this. And I give an example, a transcript in one of our studies, and this is a post intervention transcript. So the teacher in this case has already learned to use these dialogic talk tools, and she was already involved in some professional development. And I will just give you 2 minutes to read the transcript. And keep in mind, these are children aged 4 till 6. Wonderful, isn't it? These are kids aged 4 till 6, and I am always surprised by the way they are interacting with each other. So what we see in this transcript is a teacher that gives space to children to voice their own ideas. She tries to give them space to change those ideas, to say more about it, to specify their ideas. And what we also see that the kids are really making an effort to understand each other. So in the bottom line of the transcript, they're really trying to understand what the other student was saying. I think this is really wonderful. This is what can happen if you make classroom interaction more dialogic. So what I've now done is talking about our conceptualization of dialogic classroom talk. I showed you a little bit how it looks like in practice. And if this wasn't a live stream, I would share some video recordings with you of the kids talking with each other. And this brings me to the final topic of my talk. Does dialogic classroom talk in the context of early childhood education support children's learning and development? So let's have a look at some of our studies. And I will first start talking about one of our implementation studies. And this is one of the first studies we did in early childhood education. And we worked together for a period of 4 months with 4 teachers and 92 of their children. And we used some kind of design-based approach. So together with the teachers, we developed, refined, and evaluated the model to talk intervention. And before, after, and during the intervention, we tested children's oral communicative competence using a standardized approach. And furthermore, in each classroom, we made about 16 video recordings of whole group and small group classroom talk. So we had a huge data set. And on a weekly basis, we discussed these videos with the teachers and supported them to bring these talk moves into practice, these dialogic talk moves. So what did we find in this first implementation study? Well, on the level of teachers, we found that they were able to use the dialogic talk moves. Our results indicated an increase in the use of dialogic talk tools between the pre and post observation. And this you can see in the bottom line of this figure. The total, you see the percentages of pre and post talk tools. And these are percentages of the total number of teacher turns in the pre and post conversations. Furthermore, what was also interesting is that the teachers reported that the intervention really helped them to gain a better understanding of the children's language development. So they have a student report they're writing, and for the first time, they were able to write something about the communicative development of the children. It was really interesting for them. What they also reported, and this is something we are now studying in more detail, is that the social climate in the classroom improved. And that the children had more positive social interaction, for example, during play-based situations. In these situations, children were asking more questions to other children and were more focused on understanding one another. Well, what did we find on the level of children? Well, what we see, first of all, is an increase in, significant increase in their level of oral communicative competence between all measurement occasions. So we see that the mean improves over time, and we see that these are medium to large effect sizes. This together with our video observations. In these video observations, we noticed, especially in the post observation, that children were having more long turns, and these were turns of 13 or more words. So this indicates that teachers gave them more space to talk. And combined with the next result, we think that, and we see also that the language of the children they're using in the conversations is more complex. But what we see is that an increase over time in the use of key linguistic features of reasoning and communicating. So for example, children were using more words like because and if and I mean da 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 da, or he means da 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 da, etc. So this indicates that the ability of children to communicate and search for shared understanding increased over time. Well, this was our first implementation study. Well, next we were interested in the effectiveness of our model to talk intervention, because what we didn't have in this implementation study is a control group. So what we did is we tested the effect of our model to talk intervention using a pre-test, post-test control group design. And in this study, 21 teachers and almost 500 kids participated. And 12 of these teachers were randomly assigned to the intervention group and 9 to the control group. And all the teachers received the same materials and orchestrated the weekly whole group classroom conversations about the same topics. So the topics were the same between intervention and control group, and they were all about different animals. What was different is that the intervention group participated in a professional development program, the Model to Talk intervention, and it consisted of a workshop on dialogic classroom talk, and we were handing out materials, so the dialogic talk tools I talked about earlier, and they received weekly video coaching sessions with a teacher training. And these video coaching sessions were focused on the use of dialogic talk moves in these classroom conversations. Well, what did our study show? Well, first of all, teachers in the intervention groups over a short period of only 6 weeks learned to make the classroom interaction more dialogic by using these dialogic talk moves. And as a result, they created more space for children to talk and think together. And secondly, our multi-level models showed that the Model to Talk intervention had a significant and medium to large effect on children's oral communicative competence. And interestingly, in a recent study with a new sample and a different conversational topic, we were able to replicate the findings of this study. So we were able to show that Model to Talk is indeed an effective way to support children's oral communicative competence and to make classroom interaction more dialogic. So to round up, in this presentation, I've shown that dialogic classroom talk can be implemented in early childhood education already, with young kids already. And the results of our study show that teachers are able to make their classroom talk more dialogic. And this results in interesting conversations in which children learn to talk and think together. And this has a positive effect on their oral communicative competence. And interestingly, studies by my former PhD student, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 shows that children that have good oral communicative competence skills are more frequently socially accepted by their peers. In other words, when we support children's oral communicative competence through dialogic classroom talk, this might also improve the social relations between children and the social climate in the classroom. And at the moment, we are analyzing some models to study if this is the case. And there's more to come. Currently, we are conducting studies on dialogic book reading in early childhood education. We are studying dialogic talk during role play and object-oriented play with children aged 2 to 6 years. And we are studying how dialogic talk in small groups in the upper grades of primary school might support students' audience awareness and consequently might support to improve the text quality they're writing. And we are starting some interesting eye tracking work. And with this eye tracking work, we aim to capture teachers' interactive cognitions during dialogic classroom talk. Well, this is all ongoing work and we keep you posted. For now, I would really like to thank you for listening and for your attention. And